Sign it now, Emily. My brother's voice cut through the courtroom like a knife. I looked at the paper in front of me, then up at him. I'm not signing anything. Ryan leaned back in his chair and gave me that same look he'd worn since we were kids. That smug, patient smile like he was dealing with someone slow. Then don't cry when you lose the house. I felt every eye in that room shift toward me. My lawyer kept his hand near the file in front of him, calm as ever, but I could still feel my pulse hammering in my throat. The hearing hadn't even properly started yet, and Ryan was already acting like the judge had come here just to hand him my home. I folded my hands so nobody would see them shake. He lowered his voice, but not enough. You should have just signed when I gave you the chance. I stared at him. You mean when you tried to trick me? That made him laugh. Surely laugh. Right there in court. The judge stepped in a few moments later and everything in that room changed. Chairs straightened. Voices died. Files opened. And when the judge picked up one page from Ryan's side and paused longer than expected, something in my chest tightened. Because for the first time that morning, Ryan stopped smiling. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and until that day most people in my family would have described me the same way they always had. Quiet. Practical. Not the one who made scenes. I work as a medical billing specialist for a regional clinic. It's not glamorous and nobody's ever bragged about it at family dinners, but it's steady work. It's detail-heavy. It requires patience, accuracy, and long hours staring at records most people would never bother reading twice. That mattered more than anyone realized. I wasn't the kind of woman people noticed first. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. I didn't have a luxury car parked outside or some polished life people could envy online. I paid my bills. I kept my promises. I showed up when it counted. And in my family those things never seemed to impress anyone. Ryan is 3 years older than me. Growing up he was the one they always praised. If he made a mess it was somehow charming. If I made a mistake it turned into a lecture. He had confidence, and in our family confidence was mistaken for character. He could talk his way out of anything. I learned early that fairness was not the same thing as love. When we were kids, if Ryan broke something somehow I had been part of it. If he forgot a birthday he was busy. If I forgot one I was cold. If he raised his voice he was stressed. If I defended myself I was disrespectful. That pattern didn't disappear when we got older. It just got more expensive. After our parents died I stayed in the family home. Not because I was trying to take anything from anyone, but because I had been living there already, helping more than anyone knew. During my mother's last year I handled her appointments, medications, paperwork, and meals. During my father's decline, I was the one driving him to specialists and staying on hold with insurance for hours at a time. Ryan visited when it was convenient. He made dramatic entrances, brought expensive pastries nobody could eat, and somehow left with everyone thanking him. I was the one who stayed after the guests went home. The house itself wasn't grand. It wasn't some mansion sitting behind iron gates. It was a modest 3-bedroom home in a decent neighborhood, valued at around $220,000. To some people that might not sound like enough to destroy a family over. But it was enough. Enough for greed to wake up. Enough for old favoritism to turn into entitlement. Enough for my brother to decide that because he wanted it, it should be his. At first, after the funeral, Ryan acted almost normal. That should have warned me. He came by with coffee one morning, stood in the kitchen like he belonged there, and asked me what I planned to do with the place. I remember drying a mug and saying, "Live here. Same as I have been." He nodded slowly. For now. There was something about the way he said it that made me set the mug down. For now. I repeated. He shrugged. We'll have to deal with the estate. Split things fairly. I stared at him. If you mean fairly, then say fairly. Don't say it like I'm renting. He gave me a tired smile. Emily, don't start. That was his favorite phrase when I was right and he didn't want to discuss it. Don't start. A week later he called a family meeting. Not with lawyers. Not with any official paperwork at first. Just family. Which is usually where the ugliest things happen because people feel free to be cruel when there's no record. My Aunt Linda came. My cousin Beth came. Even my mother's old neighbor dropped by for a while and sat awkwardly at the edge of the living room like she knew she shouldn't be witnessing any of it. Ryan stood near the fireplace holding a folder. I remember the way sunlight came through the blinds in thin stripes across the carpet, and how normal the room looked while my life was quietly being pulled apart in it. He said, "I've been reviewing the situation, and the simplest solution is for Emily to sign over the house so it can be sold cleanly." I looked up from my seat. "What?" He pulled out a few pages and stepped closer. "You can't maintain it on your own anyway. It makes more sense for me to manage the sale." Aunt Linda gave one of those fake sympathetic sighs. "Honey, maybe that's for the best." I took the pages from him. It wasn't a sale agreement. It was a transfer. A full ownership transfer. To him. I looked at him for a long second before asking very carefully, "Why would I sign a paper giving you the whole house?" His voice hardened. "Because dragging this out helps no one." "No," I said, setting the pages down on the coffee table. He said, "Sale. This isn't a sale. This gives you everything." Ryan crossed his arms. "And then I'd distribute things properly." I almost laughed. "According to who?" "You." His jaw tightened. "You always think everybody's against you. And you always think everybody's stupid." The room went still. That was the first time I had said something like that in front of the family, and they hated it more than his lie. Because in families like mine, the real crime isn't deception. It's naming it. He looked at me with cold, embarrassed anger and said, "This is exactly why nobody can work with you." Then, right there in front of everyone, he added, "You lived here because Mom and Dad felt sorry for you." That landed harder than I expected. Not because it was true. Because it was cruel in a way only family can be. Designed not just to insult me but to rewrite my entire life in one sentence. I stood up. "Get out." Aunt Linda gasped like I had slapped him. Ryan didn't move. "You don't get to throw me out of a house that belongs to both of us." I stepped toward the door and opened it. "Then take me to court." I didn't know then how quickly he'd do it. 2 weeks later, I was at my kitchen table sorting clinic forms before work when I heard the mailbox slam shut. I stepped outside in slippers, picked up a certified envelope and saw the return address. A law office. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside were court papers. Ryan was formally challenging ownership and claiming there had been an agreement. One signed by me, acknowledging that the house would pass to him as acting estate manager pending sale. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I turned the page. There was a signature line. My name was on it. Or at least something meant to look like my name. I sat down right there at the kitchen table and stared until the letters blurred. My first reaction wasn't even anger. It was disbelief. Then came humiliation. Because once a lie enters a family, it never stays in one room. By that evening, my phone had already started buzzing. Beth texted first. "Why are you making this ugly?" Then Aunt Linda. "Ryan says he tried to be fair." Then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "Can't believe you'd fight over money after everything your parents did for you." I remember holding my phone and realizing that he had done what he always did best. He got there first. He controlled the story before I even knew there was a story to defend myself against. And that night, sitting alone in that house, surrounded by framed photos of people who were gone, I understood something that changed everything. This was never about grief. This was never about fairness. This was never even just about the house. Ryan wanted the final word. He wanted to prove that even after our parents were gone, he could still erase me from the center of my own life. What he didn't know yet was this. I had spent years cleaning up other people's paperwork mistakes. And something about his story already felt wrong. I didn't have proof yet. But I had the feeling. And in my life, that feeling had saved me more than once. I picked up the forged document again, looked at the signature and whispered, "You should have aimed for someone less patient." Because I wasn't going to sign. I wasn't going to leave. And I was done being quiet in ways that only helped other people hurt me. What I didn't know then was that the first real crack in Ryan's case wouldn't happen in my living room. It would happen in a lawyer's office, with someone who had known my parents longer than Ryan had been lying to all of us. That was the moment I stopped reacting like a sister in shock, and started thinking like someone building a case. The next morning I called in late to work and made coffee I barely touched. I spread every document I had across the kitchen table. Old tax statements, utility records, insurance papers, handwritten notes from my mother, and a battered accordion folder my father used to keep locked in the hall cabinet. I had opened that cabinet 100 times while caring for him, but until then I had never gone through it like evidence. Now I did. Because that's what this had become. Evidence. I kept coming back to the same question. If Ryan was so confident, Why had he started with pressure instead of paperwork? Why the fake family meeting? Why the emotional ambush? Why call me difficult before anyone had even looked at the documents? People who know they're right usually don't need that much performance. By noon, I had stacked everything into neat piles and realized I needed real legal help. Not a friend of a friend. Not someone Ryan could charm. Someone who knew my family before this mess and wouldn't be impressed by his polished voice. That's when I thought of Daniel Mercer. Daniel had been my parents' attorney years ago for routine matters. Estate planning, property updates, a few business records for my father. He was older now, probably late 60s, sharp-eyed, plain-spoken, and one of the only professionals my mother fully trusted. I called his office expecting to leave a message. He answered himself. Mercer speaking. My throat tightened. Mr. Mercer, this is Emily Carter. A brief pause. Then his voice softened. Emily. I heard about your parents. I'm sorry. Thank you. I looked down at the forged document in front of me. I need help. He didn't ask questions over the phone. Just told me to come in at 3 and bring everything. His office sat above a pharmacy in an older brick building downtown. No polished glass walls. No dramatic marble lobby. Just a faded brass directory by the entrance and the smell of old paper when the elevator opened. I liked that immediately. Daniel greeted me in shirt sleeves, no jacket, reading glasses low on his nose. He shook my hand, then noticed the box of files in my arms and said, "That's either very good news or very bad." "It's my brother," I said. He gave me a look that suggested he already understood more than I had said. We sat down. I told him everything from the family meeting to the court papers to the signature that wasn't mine. He listened without interrupting. That mattered too. Some people hear family conflict and immediately start translating it into personality. Oh, siblings fight. Grief makes people strange. Surely it's just a misunderstanding. Daniel didn't do that. When I finished, he held out his hand for the filing copy Ryan's lawyer had served me. He read in silence for nearly 2 full minutes. Then he set the papers down and said, "Did you ever sign anything transferring control of the property to your brother?" "No." "Did you authorize him in writing to act on behalf of the estate?" "No." He tapped the page with one finger. "Good." I blinked. "Good. Good," he repeated. "Because if this is false, then your brother has made a very serious mistake." He adjusted his glasses and pulled the document closer again. At a glance, the signature looks passable. That's usually enough to frighten someone. But I'm less interested in whether it looks like your name than whether it behaves like a real legal document. I almost smiled for the first time in days. Behaves. Yes. He looked at me over the frames. Paper tells on people. Then he started pointing things out. The formatting was off. The witness line was empty. The document referenced a previous estate memo using the wrong date style for that office. And then there was the signature page itself, which looked like it had been copied separately and attached. I leaned forward. "So it's fake." He held up a hand. "I'm saying it raises questions. Strong ones. But questions win cases when people get sloppy." That sentence stayed with me. Questions win cases when people get sloppy. Daniel asked if I had any of my real signatures on old documents from around the same time. I did. Medical consent forms, utility renewals, insurance changes. He compared them one by one. The more he read, the quieter he became. Finally, he said, "Emily, your brother may be counting on one thing." "What?" "That you'll be too intimidated to fight properly." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That sounds like him. Daniel nodded once. "Then let's disappoint him." He agreed to represent me. On the way home, I felt something I hadn't felt since the court papers arrived. Not relief exactly. More like traction. Like my feet were finally on the ground again. But Ryan didn't let up. If anything, he became bolder once he realized I had counsel. First, he started calling relatives more aggressively. I found that out when Aunt Linda cornered me outside the grocery store and said, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear, "You know, dragging your brother to court over a house is shameful." I looked at her. "He dragged me." She sniffed. "That's not what I heard." "No," I said. "I'm sure it isn't." Then she lowered her voice and said the part she had really come to deliver. "You've always been jealous of him." I still remember the heat that climbed my neck. Not because it was true, but because it was so old. That same family script. If Ryan wanted more, it was ambition. If I defended what was mine, it was envy. I pushed my card away without another word. Second, Ryan actually showed up at the house with a real estate agent. That happened on a Thursday. I was pulling into the driveway after work when I saw his SUV parked out front and a woman in a beige blazer standing on my porch holding a folder. I got out of my car and said, "What is this?" Ryan turned around like I was interrupting him. "Just getting an early valuation." I laughed in pure disbelief. "You brought an agent to my house?" "Our house," he said smoothly. The agent gave me a small, strained smile that said she regretted every decision that had led her there. I walked up the path and stood between them and the door. "You need to leave." Ryan stepped closer. "You know, you're making this uglier than it has to be." "No," I said. "You just thought I'd be easier to push around." He leaned in slightly. "Enjoy the place while you can." That line stayed with me all night. Not because I believed him. Because he wanted me to. That was always his method. Make you anxious enough to surrender before reality catches up. The third betrayal came during pre-hearing mediation. I had never been in one before, and I think Ryan counted on that too. The room was sterile and overlit, with one long table and a clock that seemed louder than it should have been. Daniel sat beside me, calm and prepared. Ryan sat across from us with his attorney, wearing a navy suit and his courtroom face, the one that suggested he was the only adult in the room. At one point, while discussing interim possession, Ryan actually laughed and said, "Emily doesn't even understand half these documents. She's emotional." I turned my head slowly and looked at him. Daniel spoke before I could. "My client understands enough to know when a signature is being misused." Ryan's lawyer cleared his throat. "Let's keep this constructive." Ryan spread his hands. "I'm trying to. But she always turns things into a crisis." I wanted to throw the water glass at the wall. Instead I sat still. Because Daniel had warned me in the parking lot before we walked in. "He will try to provoke you. Don't help him." So I didn't. I took notes. That's what frustrated Ryan most, I think. Not that I fought back loudly. That I stopped performing the role he had assigned me. The shaken sister. The guilty daughter. The overwhelmed woman who'd eventually sign something just to make the pressure stop. That I watched. And the more I watched, the more I saw little breaks in his act. A twitch in his jaw whenever Daniel mentioned original filings. A hesitation when dates came up. A fast, practiced answer whenever anyone asked where exactly the disputed paper had been stored before it was submitted. It was never the same answer twice. What Ryan didn't know was that I had started building my own timeline at home. Every visit. Every call. Every piece of mail. Every document linked to the property. I made charts. Stacks. Notes. Copies of copies. At work, I used my lunch break to request archived county records and verify filing sequences. At home, I pulled old email chains from forgotten accounts. I found scanned attachments my father had sent me years earlier when he wanted help uploading forms. The house made little noises around me while I worked. Pipes ticking, the refrigerator humming, floorboards settling after dark. I'd sit there at the dining room table under the hanging light until midnight, staring at paper and dates and margins. What they didn't know was that quiet people notice patterns. And patterns had started to form. Not enough yet to expose him fully. But enough to tell me that somewhere in all this, Ryan had cut one corner too many. The question was where. The answer came from the smallest detail of all. A line left blank. A line no careful attorney would have ignored. A line that would soon matter more than every lie Ryan had told combined. By then, I knew I wasn't just defending my house anymore. I was waiting for the exact mistake that would make his whole story collapse. The breakthrough didn't come with drama. No slammed door. No late-night confession. No surprise witness stepping out of the shadows. It came from a photocopy under a yellow desk lamp at 11:40 at night. I had been comparing the disputed agreement against older estate documents Daniel had helped my parents file years before. On the surface, Ryan's paperwork looked close enough to make an exhausted person give up. Same legal phrases. Similar formatting. Same property description. But close enough is where dishonest people get careless. I had copies of my parents' property records from different years, including a home insurance update and an estate planning addendum. I lined them side by side with Ryan's document and started checking every line. That's when I saw it. On legitimate documents, There was always a witness or notary trail attached properly to any transfer authority. On Ryan's filing, one field sat there empty. Witness acknowledgement. Like, not crossed out. Not corrected. Just left there as if nobody would notice. And the more I stared at it, the more I realized the page itself looked wrong. The spacing near the signature line didn't match the top half of the form. The compression marks in the copied image were slightly different too, as if the page had been built from two separate scans. I took photos. Marked notes. Printed enlargements. Then I opened one of my old email folders and found something even better. Years earlier, my father had emailed me a draft of an estate summary because he couldn't remember how to attach files properly. In that summary, he had written plainly that no transfer of control would take place without signatures from all named parties and verification through counsel. Not only had I never signed anything, the process Ryan claimed had happened couldn't legally have happened the way he described it. The next morning, I drove straight to Daniel's office. He was already in when I arrived, coffee in hand, reading mail. I set my folder down in front of him and said, "I think I found the hole." That got his attention. He read for 10 minutes, asked for the enlarged copies, then read again. Finally, he leaned back and nodded slowly. "There it is." I sat forward. "The witness line?" "The witness line, yes. But more than that." He tapped the page. "This document presents itself as complete. It isn't. And if the signature page was assembled separately, that becomes a much bigger problem. Can we prove it?" "We may not need to prove everything at once," he said. "Sometimes you only need to prove enough to make the judge stop trusting the paper." That sentence gave me chills. Because that was the whole case, really. Ryan had built his attack on confidence. On appearance. On the assumption that if he walked into a room sounding certain, everyone else would back down. But trust, once broken, tends to break fast. Daniel started preparing a more aggressive response. He requested document origin clarification, filing support records, and original production chain details through formal channels. That alone was enough to rattle Ryan. I knew because he called me that evening. I almost didn't answer. But I did. His voice was clipped, too casual. "Why are you making this more expensive than it needs to be?" I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring out the window into the dark backyard. "I think that's your line, not mine." He let out a short laugh. "Daniel Mercer? Really? You went and found Dad's old guy?" "Yes. He's outdated." "Funny," I said. "He seems current enough to ask questions your lawyer doesn't like." Silence. Then Ryan said, "You need to understand something. Once this goes bad, you can't fix it." I almost smiled. "I think that bothers you more than me." His voice dropped. "You always did this." "Did what?" "Act self-righteous. Like you're the only honest person in the family." I closed my eyes for a second. "No, Ryan. I just don't forge papers." He hung up. That call told me two things. First, Daniel's requests had landed. Second, Ryan was scared enough to stop sounding polished. And once I heard that crack in his voice, I couldn't unhear it. Around that same time, an unexpected ally entered the picture in a way that surprised me. Her name was Tessa. She was my cousin Beth's younger sister, technically family, but never fully included in the inner circle. The kind of relative who got invited late, left early, and heard everything because people assumed she didn't matter. We hadn't been especially close growing up, but we had always shared one unspoken bond. We both knew what it felt like to be treated as optional. She texted me one night, "Can we talk?" Privately. I met her at a diner off the highway. She arrived in a denim jacket, nervous, stirring her coffee too much. For a while she just made small talk and I almost thought I'd misread the whole thing. Then she looked up and said, "Ryan's been telling people you're unstable." I stared at her. She winced. "I know. I'm sorry." I leaned back slowly. "Who?" "Linda. Beth. A few others. He said grief messed with you and that you're clinging to the house because you can't move on." I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because of course he had gone there. Tessa lowered her voice. "He also said he had Dad's blessing to take over everything." That turned my head fast. "When?" "At Linda's place last Sunday." "He said that publicly?" She nodded. "And when Beth asked if there was paperwork, he said, 'More than enough.'" I looked down at the table, then back at her. "Why are you telling me this?" She gave a sad little smile. Because he did something like this to my mom after Uncle Dean died. Different details, same act. Push hard, speak first, make everyone else sound crazy. That explained more than I expected. Not just why she believed me. Why she looked tired of all of it. Over the next week, Tessa became something I hadn't realized I needed. Not just an ally. A witness to the pattern. She told me who Ryan had spoken to, what story he was spreading, how he adjusted his language depending on the audience. To some people I was greedy. To others unstable. To others ungrateful. He tailored the lie based on what each person would most easily believe. That was useful. Because liars who customize stories usually leave seams between them. Daniel used some of that context carefully, not as gossip but as support for motive and inconsistency. He warned me not to expect a dramatic miracle. Cases like this don't turn on speeches, he said. They turn on precision. That suited me fine. By then the family had started behaving as if the outcome was already decided. Aunt Linda stopped inviting me to Sunday dinners. Beth unfollowed me online. One uncle sent me a message that read, "Sometimes peace matters more than property." Peace. Such a convenient word when what people really mean is surrender. Ryan meanwhile got louder. He spoke like the house was already gone from me. He referred to it as the place when texting relatives as if stripping it of meaning would make it easier to take. He hinted about renovations. Joked about market timing. Told one cousin that once the mess was settled he might use the sale proceeds for a lake cabin down payment. That piece got back to me through Tessa. When I heard it I sat very still. Because the house he was treating like a future investment was the same house where I had held my mother's hand after midnight when her breathing changed. The same house where my father sat in the den pretending not to be afraid after his diagnosis got worse. The same kitchen where I had learned how to stretch groceries, sort medication trays, and cry silently with the faucet running so nobody would hear me. It wasn't just wood and drywall. It was labor, memory, care. And Ryan had mistaken my attachment for weakness. He thought loving something made me easier to rob. What he didn't understand was that love can make you meticulous. By the time the hearing date arrived, Daniel had organized everything into a clean, calm strategy. No theatrics. No emotional pleas. Just record chains, legal standards, signature questions and procedural holes. Still, the night before court I barely slept. I walked through the house room by room, touching light switches, chair backs, door frames. Not because I thought I'd lose. Not exactly. But because I knew whatever happened the next day something would end. Either Ryan's claim would start collapsing. Or the family story about me would harden into something uglier. At dawn, I stood in the kitchen holding a mug I forgot to drink from and said out loud to the empty room, "I'm here." I stayed. That matters. Maybe I needed to hear it from someone even if it was only me. At court, Ryan arrived looking polished, expensive, and deeply sure of himself. He nodded at people in the hallway like a man attending a networking event. I arrived with Daniel and one box of documents. Ryan glanced at it and smirked. "Still doing homework?" Daniel answered before I could. "Always." Ryan stopped smiling for half a second. And that was when I knew. He still thought the performance would save him. He still believed confidence could outrun facts. He had no idea that one missing signature line was about to do what years of manipulation never could. Expose him in a room where charm meant nothing. By the time we took our seats, I wasn't wondering whether Ryan had lied. I was waiting to see the exact moment the court stopped believing him. Courtrooms on television always look louder than they really are. In real life, the tension is quieter. Paper sliding across a table. Shoes against the floor. A cough from the back row. The low murmur of attorneys speaking in voices too controlled to be casual. That morning, I sat beside Daniel and kept my hands folded in my lap. Ryan sat across from us in a dark suit, expression composed, one arm draped over his chair like he belonged there. Maybe he thought he did. His lawyer began with confidence. He presented Ryan as the practical sibling. The one stepping in to manage an estate complicated by my emotions. He described the disputed document as part of a straightforward transfer understanding between siblings after our parents' deaths. He mentioned my resistance, my refusal to cooperate, and my continued occupancy of the property. Occupancy. Such a cold word for living in the home where I had cared for both our parents. Then he introduced the paper. That paper. The one with my name on a signature line I had never touched. The judge received it, reviewed the first page, then the second. Across from me, Ryan kept his face carefully neutral. I think he expected Daniel to respond with grief, family history, maybe some appeal to fairness. He didn't. Daniel stood, buttoned his jacket, and began as if he were discussing weather. Your Honor, before we address any emotional framing around this matter, we ask the court to examine the integrity of the document at the center of the petitioner's claim. Simple. Precise. Unshakable. He walked the judge through the filing sequence first. Not the signature. Not yet. The sequence. What had been filed, when, through whom, and under what asserted authority. He handed over authenticated copies of prior estate planning records, then the email from my father outlining the required process for any property control transfer. Ryan's lawyer objected to tone, then relevance. The judge overruled both. Daniel continued. He pointed out that the disputed document referenced procedural standards inconsistent with the family's previous legal record style. Then he moved to the witness section. The room seemed to narrow. Your Honor, we ask the court to note that the transfer document submitted as complete contains an unexecuted witness acknowledgement line. The judge lowered his eyes to the page. Ryan shifted in his seat. Daniel went on. That omission alone does not answer every question. But it does directly affect the reliability of the paper as presented, particularly when paired with inconsistencies in page composition and signature placement. Ryan's lawyer stood. Speculation. Daniel was ready. No, Your Honor. Observations supported by comparison exhibits already entered. The judge held up a hand, silencing both of them. Then he looked more closely. That pause. That exact pause from the cold open. The one that changed the air in the room. He turned one page over, then back again. Compared the top and bottom alignment. Looked at the blank witness field. Reviewed Daniel's supporting records. Then he asked the question that made Ryan lose color in his face. Counsel, the judge said, directing it toward Ryan's side, where is the execution support for this signature page? Ryan's lawyer answered first. We believe the filing is complete as submitted. The judge didn't blink. That is not what I asked. Silence. Ryan's lawyer shuffled papers. Ryan leaned forward and whispered something to him. Daniel remained perfectly still beside me. The judge spoke again, slower this time. If this document is being presented as valid evidence of transfer intent, then the court requires an explanation for the missing witness acknowledgement and the apparent irregularity between the signature page and the body of the instrument. Ryan's lawyer tried again, less steady now. There may have been an administrative oversight. An oversight by whom? The judge asked. No answer. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. For months, Ryan had controlled every room by speaking first, louder, smoother. But here, under actual scrutiny, his story had nowhere to hide. He couldn't glare at a judge the way he glared at me in the kitchen. He couldn't rewrite the atmosphere with a joke. He couldn't turn me into the difficult one. He had brought paper. And the paper had turned on him. Daniel rose again and delivered the cleanest line of the morning. Your Honor, my client did not sign away her home. The record before this court does not merely fail to prove otherwise. It raises substantial concern that the submission itself is unreliable. The judge nodded once. Ryan finally spoke directly. That's ridiculous. Every head in the room turned. His own lawyer looked horrified. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Carter, you will speak through counsel. Ryan sat back, but the damage was done. For the first time he looked less like a composed petitioner and more like what he actually was. A man losing control. The judge continued reviewing the exhibits for several more minutes that felt like an hour. Then he announced that, based on the irregularities presented, the disputed document would not be treated as reliable proof of transfer at that stage, and further scrutiny of the filing origin would be warranted before any ownership claim could proceed. That wasn't a movie speech. It wasn't dramatic music. But to me it felt like the building itself had exhaled. Ryan's entire case had leaned on that document. And now the court had publicly stopped trusting it. His lawyer requested a brief recess. The judge granted it. The moment we stood, Ryan turned toward me with a face I had never seen before. Not anger. Not exactly. Panic disguised as insult. This isn't over, he hissed. I looked at him and, for the first time in my life, felt no need to shrink just because he was upset. No, I said calmly. It's just finally happening in a room you can't control. He opened his mouth, but Daniel stepped between us slightly. Not physically aggressive, just enough to make it clear the conversation was finished. Outside in the hallway, Tessa was waiting on a bench. I hadn't even known she had come. When she saw my face, she stood up. What happened? I let out one shaky laugh. The judge noticed. Her hand flew to her mouth. He noticed. I nodded. And in that moment, after weeks of pressure and months of old family history rising like poison, I finally felt the weight shift. Not disappear. The final paperwork and follow-up process took time, but the case never recovered for Ryan after that hearing. Once the court questioned the document's integrity, the story he'd been telling everybody started to collapse too. People who had treated me like the villain grew quieter. Some never apologized. A few sent awkward messages that pretended they had never taken sides. That was fine. I had stopped needing their version of fairness. Ryan avoided me after that. Through lawyers at first. Then through silence. His confidence had always depended on an audience willing to let him define reality. Without that, he looked smaller. Meaner. Almost unfinished. I stayed in the house. Not because winning made me triumphant. Because staying was the truth. I repainted the den 6 months later. Cleaned out boxes. Repaired the back fence. Replaced the kitchen light fixture my father used to complain about but never got around to changing. Little things. Ordinary things. The kind that quietly rebuild a life. I still think about the line Ryan threw at me in court. You should have just signed when I gave you the chance. He was right about one thing. He did give me a chance. A chance to see him clearly. A chance to stop confusing family with safety. A chance to understand that silence can protect dignity, but only up to a point. After that, it protects the wrong person. If your family ever tried to take something that belonged to you, your money, your home, your peace, or your place in your own story, then you already know this pain isn't really about property. It's about being treated like your truth can be edited by someone louder. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you stood your ground. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Thank you for watching. If my story touched you, a like would mean the world. To help others find this story, click hype. I always read the comments, so feel free to share a piece of your story with us. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. The people who count on you staying quiet never expect you to learn how strong your voice sounds in the right room.